Alright everyone, welcome to lesson 12. This week we're going to cover cause and effect and some sentence skills. I'm going to start you off with the sentence skills ahead of time and end up with cause and effect. So going to our first slide, I have a couple of questions for you and I want you to take a moment and pause to answer this. 1. True or false? People have the instinctive ability to know where sentences begin and end. Do we have the instinctive ability? Yes or no? If you picked true, it's actually incorrect. If you picked false, you are correct. We do not instinctively know where sentences begin and end. So then, question 2. Using your sentence sense and skills can help you place punctuation and revise your writing. True or false? You should have come up with true. I've discussed a few times throughout the semester that language, at least written language, isn't something that comes instinctively to us. It's something that we develop over time. It's something learned. It's cultural. We don't naturally know where a sentence begins or ends. A video we watched a little bit earlier in the semester, they said when we speak, we don't put our punctuation in where we speak. It's all just speaking conventions. When we're writing, it's not something that's going to naturally come about. Now, sometimes you might have been taught that when you take a breath or when you pause, that's where punctuation is going to go. That's where you're going to put a period or a comma. And sometimes that's true if you're really, really good at speaking like you write, but we don't necessarily put them in all the right places. You might have also originally been taught that you need to put punctuation at the end of every line. That's how I learned where to put periods at first. But they do that just to get you in the habit of putting periods on your paper. So what we have to do is we have to use our sentence sense to figure out how this is going to work. So the next thing I actually included is a really funny picture of a sign in a restaurant about a lost coat tag policy. Go ahead and look at that real quick and try and find some of the incorrect convention usage in there. We have, if you lose or cannot produce your coat check tag, you must wait until the close of business to claim your belongings. Okay, it makes it look really unprofessional when there's easily fixed errors in there. So I want you to go to our next slide, some practice on sentence sense. And I'm going to have you pause the video for a moment as each of you tries to read this paragraph, but you can only breathe or pause where the punctuation tells you you're supposed to. Most of the time when I have classes, nobody can get through that entire paragraph in only one breath. There's only 2 commas and then a period at the very end. You know that there's something wrong with the paragraph, but it's your experience and skills with grammar and conventions that let you know where the periods or where the commas are supposed to go. So what I'd like you to do is, as a class, go through this paragraph and decide where punctuation needs to go. We've learned about commas, we've learned about semicolons, we've learned about colons, dashes, etc. Use your skills from those lectures and put the punctuation in this paragraph where it belongs. Now that you've gone through, you found how difficult it can sometimes be to figure out where a sentence is supposed to end and where it's supposed to begin. Some of those ideas can go to either sentence. Like, I start daydreaming about things I want to buy sometimes. I decide I should make a telephone call. Okay, it could be sometimes I decide to make a telephone call. Which one did you guys decide on? Both ways could make sense. You don't really know what the author is saying if they didn't originally put the right punctuation in there. This is an example of run-on, and sometimes we have fragments as well. Today we're actually just going to focus on sentence fragments, not run-ons. Run-ons we're going to cover next week, but you're going to notice on the wiki that a number of our practice exercises actually have you practicing on both. So feel free to work ahead on that. Alright, so sentence fragments. We already know from all throughout the entire semester that in order to be a complete sentence, a sentence must have a subject, a verb, and then a complete thought. If it's missing one of those, we have a fragment. Now, if you look in an English book or something like that, they're going to be talking about dependent and independent clauses, and they're talking about how you end up with fragments. You can look it up more in depth if you have a little bit of difficulty with fragments. I've found that people either tend to have issues with fragments or issues with run-ons, just kind of like you have problems with using too many commas or not enough. So if you identify which one you have an issue with, either run-ons or fragments, go ahead and look up extra practice and extra help with these. So an independent clause is essentially something that has all three, a subject, a verb, and a complete thought, and it can stand alone. A dependent clause is typically missing one of those, and in order to be a complete thought or a complete sentence or an independent clause, it needs to be attached to something that has all of those. If you are missing one of those three, you have a dependent clause. Sometimes there's signal words for dependent clauses. If a sentence starts with when, be very wary. If it starts with because or and or but, all of these words that we know we're not really supposed to start a sentence with, these words tend to signal we have a dependent clause. So if there's only a single clause following that word, you might have a fragment. The cool thing is if you type up your assignments, Word's typically going to tell you whether you have a fragment or a run-on. The issue is usually trying to fix them. So if we look at the example on this first slide for fragments, we have the example I ate. I is our subject, ate is our verb. It has a complete thought. It tells us everything we need to know. Now in the second example, because you were sleeping, we have one of those dependent words, because. That signals that something needs to come beforehand, because what's causing it? What is it because of? That signals a dependent clause. So be very careful about starting sentences with that. That's why you were taught not to. Because you were sleeping is a fragment, because even though we see you were sleeping, that's subject and verb, that's fine. That because, that dependent word causes a problem. Okay, so when we look into correcting fragments, like I said, because is a dependent word. The easiest way to fix those fragments is to just get rid of the dependent word. So in our earlier example, because you were sleeping, if we get rid of because, we've gotten rid of our dependent word, we have a complete sentence. But that may not be how you want to say it. So there's a few other ways you can fix it as well. You can attach it to a sentence before it that is an independent clause, it's a complete sentence. Or you can add in information with that dependent word to make it independent, and you can add it to a sentence that comes after it. A lot of the times when I see dependent clauses as well as or dependent clauses based on dependent words as well as added detail fragments, which we'll get to in just a minute, it's usually because you got distracted or pulled away from your writing and you were in the middle of a thought. And so when you sit down, you think you've already completed that thought, because a lot of the times when we stand up after we're writing, we hit a period. We put a period down, even if we're not complete with that sentence. That's how we end up with a lot of fragments. And that's why we have rough drafts and multiple levels of revisions, so that you can catch some of those. Sometimes you don't catch them on your own, and that typically is fixed if you have a second reader, which is something I want you guys to do before you turn in your final paper. If you get a second reader for your final paper, I would like them to sign off on the draft that you're turning in. Remember, you're going to be turning in your drafts, your pre-writing, everything for your final paper. If you have a second reader, have them sign that draft and say, I did the second reading here. That way, I know that you got a second reader. Usually it shows in how well the paper is written. Okay, so moving on. Another type of fragment. Remember the last couple weeks, just every kind of grammatical chapter we've gone over, I've told you that words that end in ing are kind of the bane of our existence in the English language. Well, they cause problems with fragments as well. We have a specific category of gerund fragments, ing fragments. An example here, looking at the worn out table. Looking is our ing word, and when you read that sentence out loud especially, you feel like it needs something else. It just kind of drops off. That typically signals that there's a fragment. Just like any other fragment, the easiest way to fix this can be to add it to a sentence nearby that's a complete or an independent clause. You might be missing a subject in an ing fragment, so you might just have to add a subject. Or you can change the ing verb to a non-ing verb. So some of our fixes here. She was tired of looking at the worn out table, so she was tired, and we kept looking at the worn out table, so we added a subject and verb. Or Sue frowned, subject and verb. As she looked at the worn out table, we've added a subject and changed the verb from an ing to an ed verb. Or looking at the worn out table, Sue frowned. So again, we added a subject and verb, but we kept that ing word. It just really depends on what kind of style you like. I'd like you in your exercises to choose a variety of ways to fix those fragments. I don't want you to just fix them always by adding them to another sentence. Practice adding verbs or subjects or changing the form of the verb. Okay, so I mentioned added detail fragments a little earlier. These are another really common type of fragment that I catch. And usually, again, it's because you got distracted or you stood up and left and had to come back to your paper. Added detail fragments, again, you can add them to a complete thought nearby or add a subject and a verb because they might have a thought but not a subject and verb to back it up. So our example here happens to be an ing fragment as well. Including mice and hamsters. So you're like, well, what includes mice and hamsters? That's a fragment. You have to add more information. So subject and verb addition, you say he has several pets including mice and hamsters, or including mice and hamsters, Josh has 7 pets. Again, we've added it to a sentence beforehand or a sentence after to make it a complete sentence. Or we keep several pets, including mice and hamsters, in our garage. So we've put it in between some complete thoughts. All right. Sometimes you end up with missing subject fragments. When I end up with fragment issues when I'm writing, this is the most common problem. Sometimes I'll get that squiggly line in Word that says, this is a fragment, consider revising. And so I've kind of gotten caught up before, and I just keep adding information. I'm like, I tend to think that, fragment, it's way too short, it needs more information. And so I'll keep adding information, and then I'll just end up with one big paragraph that it still says is a fragment. It's not a fragment initially because I needed to add more information. Typically, I might have just been missing a pronoun that signaled my verb. So when you have a missing subject fragment, that's the first thing you need to check for when you have that squiggly line, that green squiggly line in Word, is to see if you have a subject. If you can't find a subject, pop in that one word and it's going to fix it. That way you don't end up with a fragment that's somehow a run-on because it takes up a whole paragraph. You can add a subject, that's the easiest thing. You can also attach it to another sentence just like any other fragment. Our example here is, but then eats junk food. Well, it's kind of a signal that it's a fragment when it starts with a word like but, because that's typically a connecting word to another thought. But then we're like, who is eating junk food? We shouldn't have a question after we're reading a sentence. It needs to give us all of our information. So we might add information, but then he eats junk food, or he goes to the gym, but then eats junk food. Both of those, we added a subject. It's just a matter of how much information you want to add. I always say go for the simplest fix. Don't make it complicated by adding a bunch of information. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video, and each of you individually on your paper go through these 5 exercises on correcting fragments. They use each of the different types that we've gone over during this presentation. I just want to make sure that you guys are familiar with spotting fragments, but also being able to fix them. Also, I'd like you guys to identify which ones you tend to have the most difficulty with. If you have problems with added subject fragments like I do, or if you tend to have added detail fragments, anything like this. Go ahead and go through and fix each of these. And I would like you guys all to share your fixes with the class, because I want to see how each of you have fixed it in your own different ways, because there's multiple ways to fix each of these fragments. Alright, so now that we're done with fragments, we're going to move on to cause and effect writing. Sometimes this can get confusing and difficult, but I hope I cleared up for you. If you still have some difficulty distinguishing between cause and effect, go ahead and look in your book. There's an entire chapter for each of the concepts that we cover in class. It'll have extra practice, it'll have articles and references for you to read. There's also a lot of cool stuff in the back of the book that you can look at. So essentially, when we're looking at cause and effect, our entire purpose is to clearly demonstrate our ability to explain either why something happened or what has or will happen because of an original situation. When I'm talking about why something happened, that signal word why means I'm talking about causes. This means that I'm going to be talking about multiple causes to a single effect. Think about it like this. If I'm writing a global warming paper, so my main topic is global warming. Everything that comes before global warming is going to be causes of global warming. Everything that comes after global warming is the effects of global warming. So I have to decide my focus on my paper. The thing is, I don't want you to write about both multiple causes and multiple effects. In any paper we write in this class, and if it's under 5 or 7 pages, you're not going to have time to fairly examine both the causes and effects. So once you figure out your topic, so if you've picked cause and effect and you're challenging yourself for your final paper, remember to pick one or the other. So if I have a global warming paper, I'm going to pick just talking about all the things that cause global warming. Global warming becomes the one effect, and I'm talking about multiple causes. I could also choose global warming as a cause and talk about all the effects that global warming are having on us. Remember just to pick one or the other. You're going to have signal words, of course, cause and why. Signal, we're talking about causes. Effect, what, happen, result. Those are all signal words that we are talking about the effects. One thing you're going to notice is you have homework, which we're going to work in class today on, where you have to identify causes and effects. You guys are going to use your computers, and I'll bring it up a little bit later. So there are essential elements that I want you to follow. This is kind of your impromptu checklist for whenever you're going over a paper with cause and effect. You need to make sure you've clearly focused on cause or effect, not both. You need to make sure there's a topic sentence at the beginning of each paragraph, and that there's a thesis statement if you're writing a multi-paragraph essay, like your final. You need at least 3 supporting sentences in each paragraph. Remember the rule of 3, and adequate transition words. You also need to have a clear method of organization. So if you're talking about the causes of global warming, you might use emphatic order and tell me from the least effective to the most effective causes. So, there's something that a little bit causes global warming, like not recycling. But the biggest thing that causes global warming are fossil fuel emissions, and that might be your last paragraph if you're using emphatic order. What I'm going to have you guys do, I believe it's on page 190, I'm going to have you read Treatment of American Indians. Take a few minutes, pause the video while this is happening, and then we'll answer some questions afterwards. Alright, so I want you to, as a class, to discuss, is this focusing on cause or is it focusing on effect? I'd like you to find my topic sentence as well. Look and find at least 3 supporting points that they use to support themselves, and find 2 or 3 of the transition words that they use to note between those points. You can pause the video while you're answering these questions. Alright, so Treatment of American Indians actually focuses on your correct effect. If you're talking about effect, you're correct. The big thing that's really easy for this one is that it has that signal word in the topic sentence. What is effect? What are the effects of these 2 treaties? So I already kind of gave you the answer. The topic sentence is that first sentence. There's a number of pieces of support in the paragraph. You guys can go around the room and list these out, but there's numbers of people, miles it takes, things like that. Those are all supporting points that they're using. There's also a number of transition words that you guys can easily find. What I'd also like you to do before you turn away from this paragraph, I would like you guys to give this paragraph a grade from A to F. If you turned in this paragraph, what a grade would you expect to get from me and why? This way you can start kind of practicing your peer reviewing muscles. I'd like you to give that author, if you don't give them an A or a B, I'd like you to tell them, you know, what can they do to improve. Pretend your friend wrote this to you. Okay, another thing I'd like you to do, the next activity, is to read the rough draft paragraph on 192, 193. And I'd like you guys in pairs to make a list of 5 changes you would make to improve that paragraph. It's a fairly rough paragraph. If you go elsewhere in the chapter, you will find the final paragraph of this one, and you'll definitely see a lot of your changes. All right, now that you've completed that activity, hopefully you've made some substantial changes. I don't want you guys just to focus on grammar. Go ahead and share those with the class, because I'd like to see some of the different changes you guys came up with, the different specialties that you tend to focus on. I'd like you to do another activity. If you look at why profiling won't work, we've read that before. We're going to do a little bit more of an analysis on there. I'd like you to find the thesis statements. I'd like you to see whether it's focusing on cause or effect, whether they're using adequate support for the thesis statement. I'd like you to find the specific outside resources, and again, rate its effectiveness. Give it an A to F rating, or a 1 to 10 rating. All right, now that you've completed that and shared it with the class, you have another article. These are all short articles, otherwise I wouldn't be giving you a bunch of reading to do. I'd like you to read How Can Cyberbullies Be Stopped? A lot of us have kids, and so this is a really interesting article to read because it's a major issue these days. It's only a couple pages, but again, what I'd like you to actually do is take out a piece of paper and create a T-chart. And on one side put cause, one side put effects. And I'd like you to look at all the cause and effect relationships that they talk about and how can cyberbullies be stopped, so that you can see the dynamic that they complete in that article. And go ahead and pause the recording while you work on that. All right, for the remainder of class, I'd like you to work on one aspect of your homework. If you have a computer available, go ahead and pull that out and use that for this. You don't. I just want to print out of the cover page of the article you choose, or you can email it to me, whatever you'd like. If not, you can take a chance real quick to run to the library and find an article to use. They're usually not very many pages long, so you should be able to print them out. When you go to the yfiles.org, just go ahead and look at the archive, search an interesting word, whatever you'd like, and pull out an article. All of these articles tend to talk about the causes and effects of issues. And so what I would like you to do in a paragraph or two for your homework is first summarize the article. Tell me what the article's about. You're going to have to read the whole thing to tell me what this is about. Essentially, I want you to pull out the highlights, create a preview of the article for me. And then at the end of that paragraph, or in a separate one, I'd like you to tell me whether this paragraph focuses on causes or if it focuses more heavily on effects, and why. I want you to argue your answer for me, why you think it focuses on causes or why you think it focuses on effects. If you just tell me it focuses on cause, or you just tell me it focuses on effect and you're incorrect without justifying yourself, I won't know where I need to help you out with these concepts. I hope you have a wonderful class. I'm probably still flying in the air. Enjoy your week. I will see you next time.